Do you want to know how AI is preventing migrants from Africa from drowning? Yeah, you're going to want to listen to this episode because we're going to talk about it today because one woman has created a really interesting network of AI functions that really help reduce illegal fishing or actually help enforce against illegal fishing. And that's going to help migrants or people to not migrate into Europe from Africa and risk their lives to get there. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a woman named Dahia Belhabib, who's from Algeria, who has revolutionized the way we look at enforcing illegal fishing. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, let's talk about how you can get more apprised and more aware about what's happening in the ocean. And if you want to get a job in the ocean, how you can get caught up on all the different jobs that are happening in the ocean, all the different job ads that are happening for marine science and conservation by signing up to my newsletter. It's all you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. I send out an email to your inbox every weekday, Monday to Friday, and you get 3 news items. You get the latest podcast that we've published from everybody on our network, not only Beyond Jaws and How to Protect the Ocean, but some other podcasts that we have that are interesting as well. And you also get to find out, the latest news items and the latest job ads. So just go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Put in your emails for free. I do not share my email list with anybody. I don't sell them. I don't share it. I just want you to be more aware of what's happening in the ocean because that's what this whole company is about, is just bringing you information and bringing you stories around the ocean to help you stay more aware so you can make better decisions around the ocean and to live for a better ocean. So that's what we're going to be doing. So speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Now let's get into what's happening in the ocean. Dyhia Belhabib, a woman from northern Algeria who couldn't go to the ocean when she was a young woman, a young lady, a young child, because it was too dangerous. There was a civil war going on, and if you had to cross the mountains to get to the ocean, you may not get there alive. And so it was very dangerous. She never really knew what the ocean was all about and never really had that passion for the ocean in person, but was always curious. And then she met someone when she was probably around before she went to university, and she met someone who was also studying marine science, and she was like, wow, that's really interesting. Growing up in a place where women weren't really thought of as being educated and they were told what to do. She was engaged at a young age. I think it was 13, which is crazy just in thinking in that, but that's the culture that she grew up in. When she met someone who worked for the National Institute of Marine Sciences and Coastal Management, she was like, hey, I want to go there. So she went there. She studied there. She was the only woman in the program. She broke off her engagement with her fiance so that she could focus full-time on her studies. And she just remembers, as she went through, she remembers the, feelings of freedom, of fear, and unreality on her first trip at sea. And she says, while other students dove for samples in the water, she floated on the top of the water trying to survive because she never learned to swim. She still doesn't know how to swim, but you'll be amazed at what she's been able to do. She met up with one of the sort of world-renowned fisheries biologist, Daniel Pauly, who's Canadian, and he works at a UBC, University of British Columbia, and she decided to do it. She ended up doing a PhD with him, and her doctoral research, over 90% of the world's wild fisheries had been eradicated, and Pauly was sounding the alarm about it at the time. So that's what she did. She worked on illegal fisheries and looking at how it reached epidemic proportion, right? Like how bad it was. So Belhabib spent the next few years in West Africa, when her research uncovered the extent of illegal fishing to feed Chinese and European markets, she made the front page of the New York Times. Being African myself, she says, I was able to bring people together to openly share data in a way that I'd never done before, or that had never been done before. So it's not hard to imagine, her corralling government officials, disarmingly frank and engaging and energetic. That's how her personality. She's 5 foot tall, just over 5 feet tall, and talks a mile a minute. But she has a talent for bringing people together, and because she was African, she had that connection with people, and so that people really fled to her and sort of said, hey, flocked to her and said, hey, I feel comfortable sharing data with you. In that time, she was looking at how illegal fishing was working and how people were kind of getting around illegal fishing. So what would happen, as she describes, is a vessel would do illegal fishing in one country and then offload their catch maybe in another country. And then they would go to another country, a different country, and they would fish. So a lot of the times you'd have industrialized countries going to, say, waters off of the coast of Africa, and they would take all the fish, leave, and then leave the, sort of the African artisanal fishers with no fish. So the African artisanal fishers had nothing to do, and they had to feed their families. They had to do something. So they have to go where they can find jobs, and that's in Europe. And they became migrants, and they would all get on a boat, and they would all sail to Europe, and wherever they landed, that's where they landed. Some got to the Canary Islands, some got to actual Portugal or Spain, but many of them didn't make it. The vessels, which were not probably up to par, were probably overcrowded. A lot of them would sink. There's some of the Coast Guards, like the Spanish Coast Guards, a lot of them would describe times where they saw hundreds of people die at once and trying to save as many as they could, but they just couldn't do it. So you had this illegal fishing operation, which was insanely done because they just couldn't track people from one country to another because the databases never mixed. There wasn't one large database repository where there would be, where they would track fishing vessels and their illegal fishing activities. So, okay, how do you do that? You make one large database. So, Dahia was like, hey, let's just get this going. Let's just try and get this going. And all the countries, when she looked at it, it was all politicized. They're like, well, no, we can't do that because we can't infringe on somebody else's, like other countries' rights, and nobody wants to share data and this and that. So she's like, you know what? As a very entrepreneurial person, she was like, you know what? Screw it. I am going to do it myself. So, she had a young child at the time. She stayed up late at night, and she would begin combining through government reports and news articles through dozens of languages, which she speaks very fluently, several of those. She kept growing that database. Word spread, and the network of informants also spread. Often government officials were the informants, frustrated with international inaction on illegal fishing, and then it began expanding. She moved to a small nonprofit and began advising Interpol and national governments. This is how big it is. She created the database herself, right? The database, christened Spyglass, grew into the world's largest registry of criminal history of industrial fishing vessels and their corporate backers. So essentially what happens is they have this registry. And so if there's an illegal fishing that happens, say in Namibia, and that would go into, and there was a report that was made, that would go into the database. That database would be shared across a number of countries. So if that vessel was coming to another country or docked in that other country, they'd be like, oh, that ship is there. It's probably doing something illegal. Let's track it and let's try and get it. That's essentially how it worked, right? So there's so much information. Imagine one person just putting all this information together, right? You can't keep up with all that information. It's very difficult to do that because there's so much crime that was going on. I would imagine the database really highlighted that crime, right? It'd just be unreal. So in 2021, she made a really impactful move. She co-founded the National Crime Investigation Services. It was a startup that uses AI and customized monitoring technology to enable more effective policing of marine crimes and criminal vessels at sea. So together with her founder, Sogol Gotten, who has a background in ethical AI, she named their core algorithm Ada in homage to the Ada Lovelace, who was the woman who wrote the world's first computer program. So Belhabib, attempting to tackle one of the most intractable problems, contemporary environmental conservation, illegal fishing across the oceans, difficulty of tracking ships creates ideal cover for some of the world's largest environmental crimes. So the article that I'm looking at here goes into how, after World War II, the fishing industry just sort of industrialized and it became even more powerful in terms of how many fish it can go. And it goes into all that. But essentially, with depleting stocks, you needed to be able to gather things that, vessels that were doing illegal things. And AI really sort of sped that up, right? As we were seeing more and more fishery stocks that were collapsed or overfished or fished to capacity, we started to see the big problem. So essentially what they did is that, they used her AI-powered database, Marine Crimes, with that data tracks vessel movements in real time. So she began tracking signals from the marine traffic transponders carried by oceanographic ships, which is called AIS, Automatic Information Systems. And those are detected by land transceivers or satellites and used to track and monitor individual vessel movements around the world. So she used that, plus her team built an AI-powered risk assessment tool called Grace in honor of the pioneering coder Grace Hopper. I love the homages to the female, computer scientists. So this Grace AI risk assessment tool predicts risk of environmental crimes at sea. So when combined, the vessel detection devices such as AIS and Grace, it provides real-time information on the likelihood of a particular ship that is committing environmental crimes. So, the AIS detects where the ship is going. You can find where the ship is going. If this ship, is more than likely at risk of, committing some illegal fishing crimes, then you can track it and you can try and find it, right? That's how it does. The problem is, though, is AIS monitoring sometimes isn't perfect, right? Sometimes it's delayed. The data that comes in goes to the Coast Guard. Coast Guard can track it, but it's still, by the time they get to the dock to be able to to arrest the fishing vessels or to seize the fishing vessels, those fishing vessels are gone. That's the tough part about enforcement, is the data doesn't come in necessarily in real time. So even with this information, as much as we can track and we can look at risk based on ships and where they're going to, and trying to track them and maybe predict the routes that they're going to. It's very difficult to do that, because by the time you get there, by the time you analyze the data, put it together, and figure it out, they're probably gone. Right? That's the biggest part. That's the biggest problem, right? But there's other things that are great, because she shares the information on human rights and labor abuses over to Global Fishing Watch, a not-for-profit organization that collaborates with the National Coast Guards and Interpol to target vessels suspected of illegal fishing for boarding, apprehend rogue fishing vessels, and police the boundaries of the marine parks. The observatory visualizes, tracks, and shares data about the global fishing activity in near real time for free, and it was launched at the Our Ocean conference in Washington back in 2016. But is backed by some of the world's largest foundations. Google is a part of it, Oceana, and SkyTruth, which is a not-for-profit that uses satellite imagery to advance environmental protection. So now we have the right tools, we have everything that's great. The problem is it's too slow, right? It's way too slow, but it's putting things together, right? And so the other thing about AIS, it's not carried by all fishing vessels. So there are a lot of fishing vessels. There was a study that came out recently showing that a lot of the illegal fishing vessels fishing vessels that are doing illegal fishing are not tracked by AIS. So they can't really be tracked. And so they're all over the place. I remember seeing the graphic of it. They're all over the place, but you can't see where they're going because they're not tracked by AIS. So there's got to be other things to do to triangulate the position of the fishing boats that are in stealth mode, basically that are not being tracked by AIS, to enable tracking of so-called dark fleets. Because this is where the problem is. These fleets are massive. Like China has probably the biggest fleets, makes $8 billion in fishing and illegal fishing alone. And so that's where it becomes a problem. So it's really hard for one organization to do something, especially if it's retroactive. So what did Belhabib do? She's like, okay, well, we'll work with these technologies to increase the ability to track things in real time. Imagine that, tracking things in real time. This is what AIS can do, right? Or AI can do. So essentially what they're doing now is they're working with different groups of satellites, right? They're working with that control satellites, that look at marine boundaries. They have all these layers that they put in. They feed all this information in. And now with the information that they have, they can actually track pretty much real-time data and get that better and better and better to look at how these vessels are moving and where they're moving to. So imagine just a marine protected area. It has a boundary. There's no physical boundary, but it has a boundary. And a lot of the fishing vessels can get access to those fishing boundaries or those marine protected area boundaries where you cannot fish within them. But the problem is they will fish within them. Just it's really hard to detect. Well, I remember when I was working back in the early 2000s, I was working with the DFO, and I remember talking to a colleague of mine who worked on the East Coast, and they were like, yeah, it's really difficult to do enforcement because our satellite imagery doesn't work in real time, right? It's really difficult to get real-time images. So the images that we do get, by the time we detect a fishing vessel within a satellite, or by satellite within a marine protected area boundary, it's pretty much done. It's gone. Right? It's probably offload all the stuff to be able to get the evidence that it did fish within that, which if you're trawling, just to let you know, you can actually tell if you're trawling, right? You slow down, or there's more of a wake behind the boat and you slow down in that. So you can actually tell when fishing vessels like shrimp vessels or anything like that is trawling, you can actually tell when they're trawling because the vessels slow down and there's a bit more of a wake behind it. So there's ways to be able to do that. But now it's the trick is to gather evidence in real time to be able to track that. So there are companies out there that are trying to do that. For instance, and countries. The European Union, for example, has strengthened its digital frontier through satellite monitoring, unmanned drones, and remotely piloted aircraft, in some cases relying on private security and defense companies to undertake data analytics and tracking. But these technologies are often focused on surveillance rather than search and rescue of migrants stranded at sea. So to go back into the migrants, this is where I was saying the Spanish Navy, when Belhabib recently spoke with the Spanish Navy, they told me that they watched over 100 people die when the boat full of migrants capsized and they could only save a few people. So they're trying to help people. They're trying to make sure that people don't obviously die as they're coming over. So that there's a lot of different things that they can do. So Belhabib's hoping that this new sort of frontier of digital monitoring and being able to catch fishing vessels in the act of illegal fishing will actually help this, right? And it's going to help Coast Guard and other agencies such as Interpol to more easily find illegal fishers while reducing the cost of deployment, monitoring, and interdiction, right? There's a lot of different things that they can do, and it's just the data, the AI technology is getting better and better and better to be able to now to work with real-time data to be able to put this stuff together and have full-on departments like Interpol, and agencies like Interpol and Coast Guards to be able to detect this and be able to find them more. With this said, I go back to the beginning. Andrew, you said at the beginning, you want to find out how AI helps, save migrants, African migrants from drowning. Well, AI is going to be used to lower illegal fishing activities. It's going to be used to reduce those illegal fishing activities. I said that, somewhat through this episode that most of the illegal fishing that happens occurs around African waters. And it takes up the illegal fishing takes the fish from African artisanal fishers, right? Local fishers, and they can't make a living. They can't sell it to feed their families. They can't make the living. They can't fish sustainably, which they have been doing for generations, because there's no more fish because the illegal fishing that has taken place has taken all those fish. So until those fish replenish and the illegal fishing stops, there'll be more African migrants that were used to be fishermen because they can't fish anymore. They can't make money off of fishing. They can't feed their families. So by reducing and trying to eliminate illegal fishing, you are saving migrants from drowning because they don't have to leave their homes. They don't have to leave their culture. They don't have to leave where they feel comfortable, where they can feed their families, have a nice life with their families, because they can make a living, right? Using sustainable fishing practices. That's where AI can help. And it's often funny, we talk about AI these days as something that is bad. I have 2 teenage daughters, and we talk about AI all the time. We talk about AI in use of, writing reports and school assignments and things like that. We talk about AI in the sort of the digital social media world, where you can't really tell if people are, you can kind of tell if people are real or not. If it's just an AI bot that looks like somebody who's trying to, you can almost tell. But soon you're not going to be able to tell. So there's like the bad parts of AI where it's like there's a lot of just different horrible things that you can do with AI. However, there's also great things you can do with AI. And reducing or trying to eliminate illegal fishing in a lot of areas, especially like Africa, to reduce migrants, right, from being, vulnerable in terms of migrating to other countries through boats and vessels. Well, now you're really looking at ways to solidify cultures and making sure that artisanal fishers can fish for generations and generations sustainably by eliminating illegal fishing in certain countries, in a lot of countries that happen. And there's a long way to go. It's a long process, but AI can help, analyze and process data like nothing we've ever been able to do as humans. And get into real time. With that ability, you can make a lot more arrests. You can really, put a dent in illegal fishing to the point where you can eliminate it eventually. That's how I feel that AI can lead us. That's where it can lead us. So I wanted you to be aware of that. I wanted to be aware of AI technology and how it's being used in illegal fishing. And a lot of it's being spearheaded by one woman, according to this article. And I think that's absolutely amazing. Someone who didn't grow up by the ocean, didn't even have a chance to go up by the ocean because they were in civil war, and comes out with this intelligent and thoughtful and purposeful way of using AI to help, eliminate illegal fishing, and which goes with a lot of human rights things and a lot of, drug trafficking and all this kind of stuff. It's a huge thing. It's a huge deal. And it's really great to see someone like Dahia Belhabib to be able to do this. A true hero, no doubt. So that's it for today. That's what I have for today. If you want to keep up with more information on this, you can do so by, one, following this podcast. Subscribe or follow, hit that button that allows you to listen to each and every episode that I publish Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Or you can sign up for our newsletter, or you could as well sign up for our newsletter, speakupforblue.com/newsletter. And then you can also just hit me up on Instagram, DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. There's so many ways to keep in touch, so many ways to learn about the ocean, and I'm here to bring that to you. So enjoy, and I'd love to hear from you. But that's it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for listening and sharing with people that may benefit from this, hearing this. And that's it for today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.